The desert base was supposed to be quiet that night, the kind of quiet soldiers learn to trust because it means nothing unexpected is moving beyond the perimeter. But shortly after midnight, a line of headlights appeared on the horizon where no convoy should have been. The men in the observation tower stared through their optics, realizing the vehicles were approaching along a route that had been closed for months. Private Larkin adjusted the magnification on the thermal scope, expecting the shapes to dissolve into harmless heat distortions. Instead, the signatures sharpened into unmistakable silhouettes of armored military transports, rolling slowly across the desert floor. There were 6 of them, spaced with the disciplined precision of a trained convoy. Sergeant Morales immediately reached for the radio handset and contacted the base operations center. His voice was calm, but the question he asked carried a trace of confusion. "Ops, confirm scheduled convoy movement on Route Delta at this hour." The response from command came back after a pause that lasted slightly too long. The operations officer sounded certain, almost dismissive. "Negative, Tower 2. No authorized vehicle movement outside the perimeter tonight." Morales lowered the radio and exchanged a glance with the 2 soldiers beside him. Through the reinforced glass of the tower, the convoy continued advancing across the moonlit desert like a formation that knew exactly where it was going. None of the vehicles used visible communication lights, yet their spacing remained perfectly synchronized. Larkin checked the perimeter sensors on the monitor mounted beside the observation window. The motion detection grid that stretched for miles around the installation showed absolutely nothing moving across Route Delta. According to every electronic safeguard the base relied on, the desert out there was completely empty. "Tell me the sensors are lagging," Larkin muttered quietly. Morales didn't answer because he was watching something far more unsettling. The convoy had reached the outer boundary where the first line of seismic detectors should have triggered alarms. No warning lights activated on the tower console. No automated alerts sounded through the base communication network. The vehicle simply passed over the restricted zone as if the security system had chosen to ignore them. Morales lifted the radio again and repeated the request for verification. This time operations responded faster, but the tone had changed. "Tower 2, confirm visual again. Are you certain you're seeing vehicles?" Morales leaned into the binoculars mounted to the observation rail. The lead truck was now close enough for him to see the armored plating along its doors and the distinctive grille used on heavy transport carriers. There was no doubt about what he was looking at. Yet something about the movement unsettled him in a way he couldn't immediately explain. Convoys usually carried subtle signs of life: helmet silhouettes and windshields, radio chatter crackling across frequencies, or occasional brake lights adjusting spacing. These vehicles moved with a mechanical silence that felt unnatural. One by one, the trucks continued down the abandoned route that curved behind a ridge several miles beyond the base. The moment the final vehicle disappeared behind the rock formation, the headlights vanished completely. It was as if the entire convoy had slipped into darkness and simply ceased to exist. Morales kept watching the empty desert for several long seconds before speaking into the radio again. This time his voice carried something the soldiers in the tower had never heard from him before. "Operations. Those vehicles just disappeared. The discovery happened just after sunrise, when a routine patrol turned off the supply road and spotted something sitting alone against the pale desert horizon. At first glance it looked like another abandoned training vehicle left behind after exercises. But the moment the soldiers drew closer, they realized the engine was still running. The armored transport idled quietly beside the road, its exhaust drifting upward into the cold morning air. Dust coated the exterior as if it had traveled a long distance through the desert overnight. Yet there were no tire tracks leading away from it in either direction. Corporal Jennings slowed the patrol vehicle and signaled for everyone to stay alert. His eyes moved carefully across the transport's windows, searching for any movement inside the cab. There was nothing but the faint reflection of sunlight across the windshield. "Anyone see the crew?" one of the soldiers asked from the back seat. Jennings shook his head slowly while keeping his rifle trained toward the vehicle. Every instinct told him something about the scene was wrong. They approached cautiously, forming a loose security perimeter around the transport. The engine hummed with a steady mechanical rhythm, proof that the vehicle had been operating recently. But the driver's door hung slightly open, swaying in the desert wind. Jennings stepped closer and pulled the door open fully. The seat inside was empty. No driver, no passengers, no radio headset, just an untouched ignition panel glowing faintly on the dashboard. The smell of warm engine oil filled the air inside the cab. Whoever had driven the transport had left only minutes before the patrol arrived. Yet the surrounding desert showed no footprints, no disturbed sand, and no sign that anyone had climbed out. Private Halvorsen checked the cargo compartment while the others scanned the nearby terrain. The heavy rear doors were sealed exactly as protocol required during transport operations. When he pulled one open, the interior revealed nothing but secured supply crates stacked neatly against the walls. "Cargo's intact," Halvorsen called out. His voice sounded uneasy despite the normal appearance of the supplies. A vehicle didn't travel hundreds of miles unattended just to deliver untouched crates. Jennings climbed into the driver's seat and studied the navigation system mounted beside the wheel. The digital map was still active, displaying a recorded route that stretched across multiple restricted sectors. According to the data log, the transport had traveled nearly 400 miles during the night. That distance made no operational sense. The nearest authorized convoy route was far to the north, and no supply run had been scheduled anywhere near this region. The more Jennings studied the route, the clearer it became that the vehicle had crossed several zones that should have been heavily monitored. The patrol exchanged silent looks while the engine continued idling behind them. Something had driven that transport across half the desert without a crew, and whatever had been inside the cab had vanished before anyone arrived to see it. The helicopter arrived faster than anyone expected, slicing through the morning sky less than 20 minutes after Jennings reported the abandoned transport. Its dark silhouette appeared suddenly over the desert ridge, descending toward the patrol with controlled precision. The moment its landing skids touched the ground, Jennings knew this response wasn't routine. Dust exploded outward as the rotor blades slowed. 4 soldiers stepped out immediately, moving with the disciplined efficiency of a unit that had done this many times before. Their uniforms carried no visible unit patches, and their equipment looked newer than anything issued at the nearby base. One of them approached Jennings while the others moved straight toward the transport vehicle. His posture was calm but authoritative, the kind that didn't invite questions. "Step away from the transport, Corporal," he said firmly. Jennings hesitated for only a moment before complying. The patrol team pulled back several meters while the recovery soldiers surrounded the vehicle and began inspecting it. Their movements were methodical, as if they already knew exactly what they were looking for. Within seconds, they shut off the engine and disconnected the onboard navigation unit. One technician removed the small device from his pack and plugged it into the vehicle's diagnostic port beneath the dashboard. The screen flashed rapidly, as if downloading a large amount of data. Jennings watched the process unfold with growing confusion. Standard procedure required local patrol units to remain involved during vehicle recovery operations. Yet these men were working as though the patrol's presence was an inconvenience. "What unit are you with?" Jennings finally asked. The soldier standing beside him didn't look away from the transport while answering. "Recovery Command," he replied in a tone that ended the conversation before it could begin. Meanwhile, the rest of the patrol stood quietly along the roadside. Private Halvorsen noticed that the recovery team avoided touching the cargo crates entirely. Their attention stayed focused on the vehicle's systems rather than whatever supplies it had been transporting. The technician eventually unplugged the diagnostic device and handed it to the team leader. They exchanged a brief look that suggested the data had confirmed something important. Yet no explanation was offered to the patrol unit watching from a distance. A moment later, the team leader raised a handheld radio to his ear. His voice was low, But the quiet desert carried the words farther than he expected. Halvorsen, standing closest to the transport, caught a single sentence drifting across the open air. "Vehicle confirmed," the leader said. "This is the third one this month." Halvorsen felt a chill move through his chest as the meaning settled in. The helicopter crew began attaching a tow rig to the transport within minutes. Whatever investigation was happening here, it wasn't meant to last long. The entire recovery operation moved with the speed of a team under strict time limits. Before leaving, the team leader turned back toward Jennings and the patrol. His expression remained neutral, but his voice carried an unmistakable warning. "You and your unit didn't see anything unusual out here today. The mountains north of the base were the kind of terrain where visibility disappeared quickly after sunset. Jagged ridges cut deep shadows across the valleys, and narrow supply routes twisted through passes that could hide entire convoys from ground patrols. That was exactly why surveillance teams monitored the region every night." Sergeant Morales sat inside the dim operations trailer studying the thermal surveillance feed. The screen painted the landscape in shifting shades of gray and white, each heat signature standing out against the cold desert rock. Normally the display showed nothing but scattered wildlife and the occasional drifting pocket of warm air. Then a line of bright shapes appeared along the mountain road. Morales leaned closer to the monitor as the shapes sharpened into clear engine signatures. 6 distinct vehicles moved in steady formation along the narrow route. "Larkin, get over here," Morales said quietly. Private Larkin slid his chair beside the console and studied the screen carefully. The convoy climbed slowly through the pass with perfect spacing. Morales quickly opened the drone surveillance feed on a second monitor. Within seconds, a remote observation drone pivoted its camera toward the same section of road. The video feed appeared beside the thermal image. The road was completely empty. Pale moonlight illuminated every curve of the mountain pass without a single vehicle in sight. Yet the thermal display still showed 6 engines moving steadily uphill. Larkin adjusted the drone camera again, zooming down the empty road. Individual rocks and cracks in the asphalt became visible, but the vehicles seen on thermal sensors remained invisible to the drone. Morales keyed the radio to contact base operations again. "Ops were tracking vehicle heat signatures in the northern mountain corridor," he reported calmly. "Request confirmation of any scheduled movement." Static filled the speaker for several seconds before the reply arrived. "Negative, Morales. No units authorized in that sector tonight." Morales watched the convoy reach the highest point of the pass. One by one, the engine signatures began descending toward a narrow canyon bend. Then suddenly, all 6 heat signatures vanished. The drone camera still showed the empty road. No headlights appeared, no engines cooled. According to every sensor in the system, nothing had ever been there. The report surfaced by accident inside an old military database archive. Private Larkin discovered it while cross-checking vehicle identification numbers logged during the abandoned transport recovery. At first, it looked like an outdated logistics record. Then he noticed the date. The document had been filed nearly 8 years earlier during a training deployment in the same desert region. Larkin read the opening paragraph twice. It described a logistics convoy consisting of 6 military transports departing a nearby staging base before midnight. The convoy had been assigned a long-range supply training exercise through the mountains. Morales joined him at the workstation. As Morales read through the report, the details became increasingly disturbing. Radio contact with the convoy had been stable during the first half hour of the mission. Then all transmissions stopped at the exact same moment. Search teams were deployed before sunrise. Patrols swept the desert for days. Helicopters searched every valley and mountain corridor. Nothing was found. No wreckage appeared anywhere along the route. No abandoned equipment was recovered. Even the tire tracks of the convoy vanished along the mountain pass. The final page carried a red classification stamp. Beneath it was a short summary of the investigation. Convoy status, unrecovered. Vehicle status, unrecovered. Personnel status: unrecovered. Morale slowly leaned back in his chair while Larkin studied the attached route map. A faded line traced the original training path through the same mountain pass where thermal sensors had recently detected the ghost convoy. The route ended near the canyon bend, the exact place where the engine signatures disappeared. By the time the pattern became undeniable, the soldiers had already started comparing their experiences. Each sighting followed the same desert corridor. Each event involved the same type of transport vehicles. Morale spread several maps across the operations table late one evening. Red markers showed every reported encounter along the route. Together they formed a single continuous line. "Same route," Morale said quietly. The line followed the exact path recorded in the 8-year-old convoy report. Every unexplained sighting aligned perfectly with the missing convoy's training mission. It looked as if something was repeating the journey. Halvorsen stared at the final marker deep inside the mountain canyon. "Maybe someone recovered the vehicles and restored them," he suggested carefully. Morale slowly shook his head. "No restoration project drives trucks through restricted zones without headlights," Morales replied. "And nothing explains engines that only thermal sensors can see." The room grew silent. Larkin finally spoke after several seconds. "What if the convoy never stopped moving?" he asked. Before anyone could respond, the operations room door opened. A captain from base command stepped inside carrying a sealed folder. His expression was firm and controlled. "Attention," he said. The soldiers straightened as he placed the folder on the table. Inside were printed directives stamped with immediate authority from higher command. The captain spoke slowly and clearly. "Effective immediately, all personnel are prohibited from documenting or discussing any vehicle sightings occurring outside scheduled operations." Morales felt the tension settle over the room. "All reports involving unidentified military vehicles will be forwarded directly to Central Command," the captain continued. "This investigation is now classified," no one argued. Because in the military, when an order like that arrives, it usually means command already knows something. Or the truth is something no one is supposed to uncover. But the soldiers who watched those vehicles move through the desert still remember what they saw. And if you had been standing in that tower watching a convoy appear where none should exist, you might still be asking the same question. What exactly is still driving those vehicles out there in the dark?